Hey, how you doing? This is Be Kind review number 4, The Writings of Jeff G. Bailey. I'm going to say this up front. Jeff G. Bailey and I are fucking friends. I love him. I think he's amazing. God, these fucking dickheads keep fucking messaging me, is what it is. So, I'm going to take my time with this shit. And, not only because I feel like I owe it to Jeff and I owe it to his fucking great writing. I fucking love it unabashedly. It really speaks to me. But I'll go into a little thing beforehand. Jeff and I, he was in, South Carolina. I grew up in Hawaii. And we're a few years apart in age, but yet, as we became friends, and as we continue to talk to each other, what always strikes us is sort of how many of our experiences were very common, and how many things happened and influenced us that were very much the same. And it's really remarkable. Now, we always talk about these things, and I was thrilled when Jeff started to write stuff down. And at first it started with writing about music, and those posts are all great. Yeah, I was going to save this for the end, but I'm going to say it here in the beginning. I encourage you to go to Facebook and go to Jeff G. Bailey and fucking friend that motherfucker so you can read this stuff. Because what I'm not going to talk... because I'm covering the Underage Chronicles, of which he did chapter 1, 2, 5, and 6. We have yet to see a 3 and 4. I could be wrong about that. I went over it 5 million times to be thorough. And I'm going to talk about the High School Sucks Chronicles 1 and 2. Right? But he writes about music. He's written about wrestling. I'm reflecting on people who died who had an influence on him. A fucking horror movies list that he put out fucking around in October, which was fantastic, right? I was going to save this for the end, but because the Be Kind reviews, people tend to, up to now, not listen until the end, though I certainly encourage you to do that for this one. What's the point, right? Jeff G. and other people who were brilliant in wrestling, who now do other things, and I often lament that if you're not doing something wrestling related, people tend to not give a shit as much. I would argue something a little different in that while it's true that the numbers aren't as great, I think the people that read Jeff G's stuff, it really has an effect on them. And I think the people that are smart enough to go to fucking Dan Wilson's horror stuff, right? Seeking Human Victims, which I'm going to do a Be Kind review on of a later date, of Dan's great shit. I think it does get to people, and I think it's one of those things where its legacy is going to be lasting, and people are going to discover it along the way. That said, I would encourage Jeff G., who is no doubt going to watch this, to collect this shit and put it someplace. A website, a WordPress site, and chronologically order it in a way and organize it in a way that you see fit. Though it is there on Facebook right now, you should go friend Jeff G. Bailey, and you should go read into this shit. I'll say that the Underage Chronicles start at about April 24th, and then you can just scroll up and find the others. Yeah. Why should you read this shit? It's genius. It's really fucking good. You want me to give my cred for reviewing writing? Undergraduate in English, and mostly literature studies. Double major, that and political science. Double minors in philosophy and ethnic studies. So, yeah, I come from the academic world, and then I got a master's degree in the normal amount of time, in English, specifically creative writing, which included a lot of literature analysis. And then I pursued a PhD as well. Um, So I got the chops. I've read a lot of writing. At the PhD level, I took different kind of courses instead of like sort of canonized literature stuff. Um, I did more modern takes, which I had never read before. Jeff G's stuff reads like more modern styles of writing, and that's a compliment. It's incredibly readable. That's the first thing that I noted. But to finish my thought before, why should you read this shit? For the reason that you should read in general, but it's to absorb this content, and you get to visit the world that Jeff has created. Jeff is letting you know about this world that he grew up in. The New York City that he talks about in these things don't exist anymore. They don't exist in any form anymore. Right? The places that he's talking about in South Carolina and North Carolina and this time in America does not exist anymore. It reminds me of the best historical fiction that I got to read. And I can't give it a bigger compliment than that. Historical fiction is stuff that if you don't know what historical fiction is, to sum it up, it's real history that happened, but it has more of a fiction kind of feel when you're reading it instead of it being a documentary. It flows like a movie, but it's based on true events, right? You can tell that Jeff G loves true crime and loves documentaries because it all influences his writing in the sense that he understands the details. He understands the salacious nature of what he's talking about, and he presents it all to you. So just know it's all there. But there's a story there. And I think that there's some common threads and connections between different things that even Jeff himself probably didn't realize, which is the hallmark of great writing. Let's fucking jump into this shit. Sometimes my eyes are going to go in weird places. Just know that, because I'm going to be looking, because I want to read some of my favorite passages from each thing. Like I said, I'm going to take my time with this shit. And if that means that you watch some of it and come back to it later, that's wonderful. I'm going to do an unboxing as well, because that way I can sort of present that as part of it and maybe get a few more views, because I think this deserves to get viewed, and I think Jeff G's writing deserves to be viewed by many more people than are going to watch this review on top of it. But I'm going to do an unboxing because, shit, I have a lot of shit to go through, and there's a couple things I'm supposed to save for Christmas Day, and it's fucking fun. So we're going to do this unboxing. I'm going to see, it's probably almost obviously a shirt. I'll put that shirt on. By the way, what am I watching? I'm watching Scarface in honor of fucking Jeff, who gave me this copy of Scarface because he's like, every man should have a copy of Scarface. God bless him. So he gave me Scarface, The Warriors, the director's cut, which isn't as good, but Jeff wanted me to see it so we could talk about it, and The Exorcist. And I watch them often, and I think of him every single fucking time. Let's open this. I'll put the shirt on, and then we're going to jump right into it. We're going to go in an order that I feel comfortable with. It's not necessarily the order that Jeff put up stuff, but I wanted to go Underage Chronicles Chapter 1, then on Underage Chronicles Chapter 2, and then on Underage Chronicles Chapter 5 and 6. And then I wanted to touch briefly on the High School Sucks. I wanted to do them together. And then we'll be out. Cool, let's unbox this bitch. No idea. Dear Steve, it's just a little note along with the fucking receipt. Dear Steve, for Christmas, I thought you needed a Christmas-themed shirt. Didn't sign who it was from. Oh, it's got... Oh, fuck! One of my favorite geeky shirts that I wore, that I still wear, is when Force Awakens came out, and Finn got that bloody fucking handprint on his stormtrooper helmet before he took it off for good. They had this great shirt, which was Disobey with the fucking stormtrooper helmet with the bloody thing. I used to wear it all the time. So this is probably somebody who used to see me wear that all the time, and so they got me this. Yeah, Disobey with fucking Stripe. But it's like, why the fuck Stripe? What's that got to do with Christmas? Gremlins, motherfucker. If Die Hard's a Christmas movie, Gremlins sure as fuck is a Christmas movie. So I'm going to put this shirt on, and then we're going to talk about the Underage Chronicles, and fucking, yeah, we're going to talk about all of Jeff G's shit. And really, what is a more fitting shirt when you're talking about Jeff G. Bailey other than Diso-fucking-Bay? Mm-hmm. In fact, gremlins are a great metaphor for Jeff G. Bailey, right? Let's dive right in. So April 19th, by the way, for those of you who are going to look. The Underage Chronicles, Chapter 1, the beginning, Chateau the Fourth, and Atlantic Twin. This is where he goes into, right, here's a favorite paragraph right off the jump. So he goes into a little intro, but then he hits here. I first discovered pornography in second grade when I found a hidden cache of Playboy, Penthouse Gallery, and Sex to Sexty comics in the woods. The person I found it with told his mother, who told mine, and I had to give it all up. My mom was cool about it, and I wasn't punished, but she told me while nothing was wrong with it, I was just too young for it. What happened? They fucking fed Jeff G after midnight with this shit, right? Just like a fucking gremlin. And so I love that he sort of sets up not only what he was experiencing, but how it altered him, right? Unfortunately, it was too late. It had unleashed something in my brain that set me on a different path from others. From that point on, I consumed as much Playboy, Penthouse, etc. as I could. So you're getting to see Jeff G, you're getting to see a chronicle of this young person who now is inexorably linked with pornography and how it alters his life. And if you're expecting this to be a tragic tale, in a weird way, this reminded me of Half-Baked. Because up to then, most drug movies were about, and then drugs happen, and then your life goes to shit, right? But this isn't that kind of story at all. In fact, I'm going to come to some conclusions at the end that people will probably find pretty shocking about this whole thing and what genre I think this writing falls into. This is a part that I think is really interesting. They were placed, he's talking about these magazines at his pharmacy. They used to keep the skin mags on the top, right? So he's talking about that experience. They were placed at the very top of the huge magazine rack, way above where the wrestling magazines were located. Wrestling was my other joy, and people looked no kinder on that than they did the pornography. I think my mother hated the wrestling magazines more than she did the pornography. Wow. So you're getting to see his two worlds cross, right? Pornography and wrestling. So he's talking about detective magazines as well. So you're getting to see a bunch of things that he's interested in. The thing that strikes me about these stories is they are a story of a young man and his sort of development and the way that he stepped in and out of this world and how his reactions were not typical of what you may expect, which sometimes he notes as well, right? And then this is really great. Jeff has a sort of instinctive way. And again, you can only write this way when you read a lot. Because Jeff obviously has read a great deal. Different kinds of writing, different kinds of styles. And then it sort of gets filtered into his own genius and technique and brilliance and ability to write himself. Right? It all just smoothly flows, right? Then Hustler came out. He was talking about different magazines, and once in a while things he would get lucky and one would be within his reach. Again, I don't want to dive into the whole thing or just read it word for word because I want you to experience these things for yourself. But I want to point out things that either grabbed my attention or I think kind of move it in a different direction or at a different level. Then Hustler magazine came out and it was a whole different level. Its greatness filled the void for a few years, but as great as Hustler was, it only put me one step closer to what I really wanted. Jeff has an ability to write to make you want to keep reading. And I think if you look at the comments on these Facebook pages, that's what people say again and again and again and again. People said, "Who knew? When did Jeff G. Bailey get the greatest page on Facebook?" It was one of the comments. And another one was like, "God, your writing just sucks me right in." And a number of people saying he needs to write a book. I would agree with all of that. Yeah. He puts in details, but only when the details are relevant. I think a lot of people who don't write a great deal fall into this trap of putting in details for detail's sake, or they're way too plain and simple. You even see this in great authors that often they get bogged down, I call it, in details. A great writing teacher that I had, Ian McMillan, rest in peace, told me that what he liked to do was he liked to start off out here and then pull the camera in and then talk about details that were close, right? Jeff does this in a few places almost instinctively. One day, we took his dad's car, so there's the shot. We've got the dad's car, and stole his stepbrother's Point Loma college ID and agreed to try to use it to gain entrance. We tried the Chateau the Fourth first, and it was a grimy, rundown-looking filth palace. The grimy, run-down-looking filth palace. Can you see it in your mind's eye? Of course you can, right? So we've got this sort of esoteric, thing of like we took the dad's car and we've got the ID, and then we see the Chateau the Fourth, grimy, run-down filth palace. Boom, you got it, right? And then we're focusing in. The old man working immediately wanted the ID as soon as I entered. Now we're very present in that moment. And I presented it proudly with the ID picture being of the 20-year-old redhead with acne. Now we focused in on just the postage stamp-sized picture. A 20-year-old redhead with acne. I was not yet 16 with good skin and it looked nothing like me. And then Jeff has an ability to write in his mind's eye, because these are from his memories. But again, memory can be a very deceptive thing in that people often portray their memories and they think that they're good storytellers. They're not, right? It takes a lot more than that, and Jeff G instinctively understands how to do this. The old man was questioning me as my eyes darted around the walls. So what are you seeing in your mind's eye? This 16-year-old, like, looking around as he's looking at his ID. He's more interested in what lies beyond the door. This old man is his gateway into the filth palace, right? Covered in fucking and sucking. Heaven wasn't so far away after all, so it seemed. This is my favorite paragraph of this first chapter. I remember the dizziness of trying to keep up the front that I belonged, as all the blood in my body rushed downward. It's subtle, it's funny. The thing that struck me the most is how funny these things were. Of course, it's about very salacious things like prostitutes and sex shows and sex shops and pornography. All of that is incredibly engaging. However, it is really the coming of age story that's also an American success story. There, I let the cat out of the bag. What the fuck, Steve? What are you talking about? I read on. I remember the dizziness of trying to keep up the front that I belonged as all the blood in my body rushed downward. It's fucking funny. After studying the ID with a magnifying glass, the detail of an actual magnifying glass, I think that this is literal. I don't think that this is metaphorical, though it may be. Either way, it's a great, hilarious image. He made me sign the signature on some paper to compare to the ID. Fortunately, I had practiced to do this just in case the situation arrived. He deemed it passable and I was free to walk about. And in a flash, we're in the place, right? We go from second grade to 16. And their ability to solve problems. My God, if you didn't know better, you would think that this was like an 80s teen movie. It's how it reads on the surface. But I gotta say this. You need to read these things. Even if you find the subject matter troubling and disturbing, even if you don't agree with it or whatever your problem is, it isn't just about porn. In fact, that's really the backdrop of what this really is, which is an older man in his 50s recounting a time in his life that nobody can mimic this experience. It is, for all intents and purposes, a moment in time captured flawlessly. And we're getting to see it through this person's eyes. And we're getting to get little glimpses of parts of America that you normally don't get to see. Why are people so fascinated with true crime stuff? Because it engages you, it grips you, it gets around your intellectual defensive mechanism and appeals to parts of you that you don't even want to acknowledge exist. And that's what this does so effectively. His memory for detail and remembering exactly the names of the movies that he saw, and then having those pictures to go along with it, which is why, again, friend Jeff G. Bailey and go look for this stuff. I'll give you clues on where it is, like I'll tell you the date that it was posted so you can find it more easily. But you really need to take a look, because it is a study in, and it's infinitely readable, and the paragraphs are very short. They're numerous, but they're short, because he moves from idea to idea so quickly and incorporates things and weaves them together incredibly effectively. He has a natural knack, and this is perhaps getting too literary, but what the fuck ever, it's my fucking review. His ability to know when to begin paragraphs. This sounds like a nitpick. It's not. Here's an example, right? Now today, I knew he was just trying to scare us so we'd leave it right then. That's him talking to us as the author, right? This guy is basically said that he has to check their IDs because the cops come in on Friday nights to check IDs when they're trying to see this porn flick, right? Now today, and then he's able to step out and talk to us. I know he was just trying to scare us so we'd leave right then, but at the time I believed every word, and it worked, so we left. So he's able to move in and out. He's able to Ferris Bueller this shit, where he's able to look at you and go like, okay, today I have hindsight. I know he's just trying to scare us, but back then, that scared kid, he's always reminding us that he's an older man talking about his experience as a younger person, and that's important because it explains insights that he has, and we never get jarred out of the story to get an explanation, to get exposition. And in the midst of the exposition, we never get jarred back in time. He writes very fluidly, and again, it's why I encourage wrestling people to read literature and read stories like this as opposed to just short snippets on Facebook or whatever the fuck, or articles that are only 200 words long. You have to read longer works so you can see the genius of being able to tell a story and string things along and and check in with your audience and make sure things that make sense. It's very important. Yep. And he always ends with a quote, and that's always a nice little touch as well, a nice little way to wrap it up. Of course, our ride was late, and we were still there when the manager was leaving. He noticed the missing posters and wanted to know if we'd seen anything. We said we hadn't, and since we clearly didn't have them with us, he left for the night. Aha. Our ride finally arrived. We retrieved the posters, and I'm happy to say I still have that Inside Sika poster and all the memories of that insanely adventurous night. It was just the beginning of what we could do and where we could go with a fake ID. He even ends with a hook and drag and a tease for the next thing. Let's go to chapter 2. Oh, I organized it correctly, and I wrote it down for myself correctly. Underage Chronicles, Chapter 2. This is the last one that he wrote, actually. Sunset Drive-In Scared Straight. Central Correctional Institution. So, and he catches us up, which again, this is September 12th where he posted this, by the way. So we left off at age 15 where we had procured a single fake ID and had finally gained access to the Chateau the Fourth adult bookstore and the Atlantic Twin Cinema. With these filth landmarks conquered, we started thinking about new places we could gain access to. So then he sets up the situation in Colombia, where he lives, or near where he lives, and how they had to venture forth. The stuff about the drive-in is fucking gold. It's super great. I don't want to spoil it for you, so I'm not going to read from it, except small details. And see how he goes from big to small. And Jeff, as he starts to gain confidence, and keep in mind this is the last thing that he wrote, he starts doing something really remarkable, which is he invokes other senses besides just the visual. There's very little to no dialogue in these things, so you don't get a lot of auditory unless he shares it with you, and then it has a bigger, more prescient impact. And when he invokes smells, as he does later in this one, I can tell that this is the most polished thing that he's written, and it's because it's the last one. I don't even think Jeff G realizes how good this last thing is about the scared straight and this thing about the drive-in. So they're going to see porno flicks at the drive-in, and the long story short, they want to save money, so they stash Jeff in the fucking hatchback of the car, which is an incredibly amusing and hilarious thing. And the first time they get away with it, but this time they get a little closer and a little bolder, and they get caught. And in the first one, Jeff's total recall, perfect recall about remembering which porn flicks he's seen and what magazines he's looked at and that kind of thing, leave him. And it's just so great. And he lets you know that something is different this time around, because he says, I have no idea what movies were playing this night, as terror is my only memory of this night. Whoa, big gear shift to what we've seen before. Now I'm in, right? We were sitting there in a cloud of smoke, enjoying the movie. Again, Jeff doesn't tell. So effective. When a large gruff man came to the window, he saw two when one had paid and wanted $8 more. He had on this big ring, and he was tapping it constantly on the roof of the car. Come on. You can't get that detail? Tack, 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 tack. And it was intimidating as fuck. Tack, 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 tack. I was frozen with fear because we didn't have $8 more. Oh! Indiana Jones, right? Problem. The problem gets worse, the problem gets worse, and the problem gets worse. And we're both underage. Problem gets worse. And we're in there illegally. Problem gets worse. As well as being in possession of illegal substances. Problem is super bad now. We're trying to talk our way out of it, and it's not going well. That ring is tapping away, and every second passes like an hour. This dude is laying it on like a drill sergeant, just putting the fear of God into us, and I just knew, oh shit, there is no doubt about it, we are going to jail that night. I'm not spoiling anymore. You're going to have to fucking read to find out what the fuck happened. He talks about later this scared straight thing with this jail that he goes to. Jeff chronicling his night in jail is fucking amazing. His run-in with the cops that get him arrested in the first place. Brilliantly done. When Jeff brings in actual historical facts or knowledge about these places that he's talking about, and when he puts the pictures, they're all great. But CCI, that's the prison that he's going to do the scared straight thing was one of the most horrifying places to ever exist. It was vastly overcrowded prison that had been built during the Civil War. Holy shit. That detail immediately lets you know what you're in for. It was without a doubt the most foulest, most vile place that ever existed. Below is a brief synopsis of the prison, just to give you an idea of the actual horror. Parentheses. Located on Huger Street, the prison held the state's most dangerous inmates in hideous, overcrowded conditions. Its demise was national news, with the New York Times calling it the prison from hell. Bob McAllister, a Columbia public relations executive, spent every Friday afternoon and evening there for 10 years counseling death row inmates. He remembered the rows and rows of bunks stacked 5 stories high. Holy fucking shit, right? The intense, stifling heat in the summer, and most vividly, he remembered the smell. It reminded me of the torture chambers of England, he said. It was dark. It was dank and it stunk. There were vermin of all kinds. It was the thing of horror movies. And Jeff revisits the smell and gives more detail to everything. Again, take a look at this thing, folks. Prisons in America. I mean, Jeff is uncovering the dark underbelly of America, but is reveling in it in a lot of ways. It's not the cautionary tale. It's not the forest in a scarlet letter. These things which should scare people and will scare you when you read them, then you realize, holy fuck, this was a teenager that was moving in and out of these worlds. And it makes it all the more remarkable. Let's go to chapter 5. Chapter 5 of the Underage Chronicles is about the Forty Deuce in New York City. I saw one of the comments was, is this what they're referring to in the Deuce? Yeah, in the series. Yeah. This area. I love how he goes in this explanation of the Forty Deuce right from the beginning. This, to me, was the strongest open of any of the writings that I'm going to talk about. The Forty Deuce in Times Square, New York City, was a moment in time that only existed in this 5-block area. He really lays it out for you. This is just 5 blocks we're talking about, right? I'm going to start over because I interjected when I should have finished the sentence. The Forty Deuce in Times Square, New York City, was a moment in time that only existed in this 5-block area and has never existed again. I'll never refer to it as 42nd Street because that street still exists. Wow. It's a very powerful notion. He's going to call it the Forty Deuce because the Forty Deuce does not exist, just 42nd Street. And he's right. Anybody who had been to New York at an earlier time, as I had been and he had been, before it got kind of cleaned up and sanitized. Like, New York used to have a rep as the most dangerous place in the country. It doesn't exist anymore. Now, while that is good in most respects, there is a kind of mystique that is lost and that Jeff G is telling us about here, which is why his writing is not just interesting, not just salacious, not just a coming-of-age story, not just a part of an American success story, really, which you'll see especially in the High School Sucks Chronicles, but it's important. It's important. Jeff G is giving us a portal into a time in America that does not exist anymore. And it's important to know these histories and to get very personal connections to them. I love it. He talks about New York. He talks about this time in New York, and there's more sort of historical data put into this part of it. I think it's because he understood that this New York doesn't exist nowadays, but there's a part of him that really wants to. That comes across in the writing without him explicitly saying it, which is really powerful. Paragraph. Definitely not a place for everyone, but for a teen with an adventurous spirit. And that's ultimately what he has, right? You can see it as a dark one. You can see it with an overly sexualized one. But at the end of the day, this is a story of a young man with an adventurous spirit. And it's that adventurous spirit that pulls him out of this shitty fucking small town that he grew up in, which we'll get to in the High School Chronicles, right? That's the connection I'm not sure Jeff understands, that it's his fucking libido and his early contact with porn and all of this stuff that got him out, helped yank him out of that small town. It was wrestling and it was porn, right? Most of the time we hear about like, oh, I'm going to leave this small town and become a success. I'm going to leave this small town and go to college elsewhere. I'm going to leave this small town and strike my fortune elsewhere. And for Jeff, it was much more primal, his reasons for leaving. But leave he did, and it benefited him at the end. He had to walk through hell to get there, but the hell that he's walking through, he doesn't hate and he doesn't fear, even though he should do both of those things. That's what makes this a fascinating story. That's the tilt. It's the character himself. The character is Jeff G. Bailey as a young man in real life. Definitely not a place for everyone, but for a teen with an adventurous spirit and a raging libido, it was the most exciting place in the world. Think Disney World for the debauched. Maybe not the happiest place on earth, but certainly the sleaziest. He goes into a great deal of detail about New York again. And he reincorporates. My friend from the Underage Chronicles 1 had gotten his own fake ID on a trip to Washington, D.C. It was a state ID card, and it looked good. I was still stuck with the Point Loma College ID, but it still continued to work everywhere. After exploring all Columbia had to offer, we had ventured out to the strip clubs out in Charlotte since there were none in Columbia. And he talks about that experience a little bit, and then he's got us in New York. The relationship with the stepfather of the friend and the money he hands them and how they work him in order to get their way, where the stepdad drops them off and is going to pick them up at 2 a.m. He drops them off in the afternoon and basically is giving them 14 to 16 hours to engage in this debauchery, and even gives them money to help them do it. There's a rule in writing that generally you're not supposed to ask rhetorical questions, or you're not supposed to ask questions at all, because then you're allowing the reader to fill in their own answer, and it might not be in the direction you want to take them. But Jeff G breaks this rule, but immediately says why there's exceptions to rules, because it works. When he asks, could the deuce live up to what my mind saw? We want to go on that journey, and we want to find out the answer along with him. I really like this, right? I really like chapter 5. I can't wait for chapter 3 and 4. And then I can't wait to look at them in order again. In chronological order of when they're supposed to have taken place, and also the order of I'm interested what different things will become present, which things will become to light and be emphasized when I read these things in a different order. I love them. I love that he also has this really clever thing that he does where he sets you up to feel a certain way along with the characters, but then immediately one thing can take you out of that and have you feel another way. It really captures the danger and the adventure of what he's talking about with these things in an incredibly effective way. Here's an example. Step D, meaning the stepdad, saw our smiles because they saw, like, here we are at the 40 Deuce, right? It's going to be nuts. It's going to be lit, as the kids say. Step D saw our smiles and immediately reminded us of the dangers and cautioned us to be careful, which is a parental thing to do, so that doesn't really affect us as readers. Then he slipped us each a fistful of 20s, smiled real big, and then his last words before we exited were, "You better take those gold chains off if you plan on keeping them." With that reality check, we took them off then and there. A curt reminder we were entering a place unlike any we had seen. Danger was in the air, and it was exhilarating. I'll spare you the details because they're all awesome. Jeff gets the sensations of not only sight, but of taste in here, and it works very well. Sensations of feeling as well, what things felt like, what things smelled like. Very effective writing. Anytime you can invoke senses like that. And he constantly checks in with the reader about what his emotional state was, what he was thinking, what he was feeling, and he's very honest with him. If he wasn't afraid of something in this bold way, he tells you. If he was terrified about something or revolted by something or embarrassed by something, he tells you that too. He doesn't hold anything back in these things. Now, he would say that he did. I didn't go into detail about this because I didn't want them to perceive me a certain way and blah, 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 blah. But what I'm talking about is it gets behind your intellectual defenses, which is what great writing is supposed to do. And it brings you along, and it takes you on a journey, and it lets you into the world. We are getting access to these clubs through Jeff G. Bailey's writing. The writing is that effective. Let's go to 6. Final chapter, Sam Davis Hotel. What can I say? Super effective. Super wonderful. His intro is worthy of the last chapter in a chronicle, which is you have to address it. And Jeff G, I think, does a smart thing in addressing it. This is the last chapter of my Underage Chronicles, even though it takes place a little after being truly underage, as we had both recently just turned 18 when the story takes place. The story in continuity would be number 6, but here it is at number 3 since I haven't written 2, 3, or 4 yet. He went on to write 2, of course. The summer of post-high school graduation, everything changed for my friend. Right? In any kind of long-term storytelling, something has to change and alter. His father had discovered his porn collection and various other vices, and now instead of staying home for the state school, is being shipped off to Nashville, Tennessee, to Trevecca Nazarene University. This was a classic case of the overly religious father trying to force-feed their child religion. I think most would agree that never works. It was also around the same time that I found out that Point Loma was also a Nazarene college. The irony of a religious college ID opening all these explicit forbidden doors wasn't lost on me. Again, reincorporating stuff, catching themes, discussing them, talking about them, but Jeff does it in a really succinct manner. You never get the feeling that Jeff is talking down to the reader. I'm so clever. Isn't this clever, this thing I did? He just talks. This writing reflects, and here's another great writing rule, right? You're supposed to write everything 3 times. Another writing teacher told me this. You write it the first time to get it down. You write it the second time to clean it up and make it perfect. And then you write it the third time to make it sound like you just thought of it. If you can figure out what that means, you will be better at art and better at writing and better at pro wrestling and better at any other endeavor that you undertake. And you'll be a better person too. Write it first time to get it down, second time to perfect it, third time to make it sound like you just came up with it. That's the hard step. There are people who can just blurt out a story and write it down, but that's not enough. You have to edit. Editing is the part that most people find to be a grind. Jeff went through that step and then made sure it sounded like he was speaking conversationally to you. It's incredibly effective, and I just can't praise this enough. I love reading these things. I've read them many times, and I recommend that you guys do the same. And I recommend that Jeff put it in such a form that it makes it easier for people to really consume these things. Because the one thing about the modern era is people don't have the patience anymore. They really just want to go from one thing to the next, and they really want to consume them. And there's nothing wrong with that. These things should be read widely, and they should be consumed. So Jeff talks about that. And he's talking about this hotel. And again, I'm not going to spoil any of it for you. The Sam Davis Hotel. It's the first time that Jeff does the trope of he has the Sam Davis Hotel by itself in a paragraph. That's the only thing it says. And it's very powerful. He doesn't overuse anything except for effective things that make the writing better. He will revisit. He's very good at detail. He's very good at ending one sentence and transitioning it to the first sentence in the next paragraph in a way that's surprising every time but still connects. Very effective. This is the first time he busted out this trope, the Sam Davis Hotel, and we know we're fucking in for it. Right? Again, I recommend reading this. When Jeff lets us into his mind of what he was thinking at the time, and we know that it coincides with him as a 50-year-old, right? Also in the mind of the 16-year-old, and they both having this same thought, right? I had zero doubt this room had known death. Then I realized that it was likely true of many of the rooms I'd ventured into over the last 2+ years. Somehow, I found that to be a comforting thought. Again, nobody does that I've read lately does that better. They set up an expectation, then they go in the complete opposite direction, but it still makes sense. Somehow I found that to be a comforting thought. The only difference here was we were in a high-rise instead of a filthy motor court around a pool filled with garbage and rainwater. Wow. We also heard our first police siren. Again, he's so good at invoking other senses. And those lasted all night. So now our mind transports to throughout this night. That's just part of the soundtrack is police sirens. That's what a seedy piece of shit part of town this was. We were definitely on the proverbial wrong side of the tracks, but as already mentioned, by this point, that was par for the course. They are now seasoned veterans, right? This is chapter 6. Again, I can't recommend this enough. Get in here. And then when he brings us into his life, which he hasn't really done before, when my wife Melanie saw the picture of me with Aunt Peg, one of the porn stars he had a picture with, a Polaroid, she said, "You look like a kid who'd be wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt." So here I am a couple of months later from that picture wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt and sucking on some humongous jugs. Long live the new flesh. The writing coupled with these pictures are an absolute delight. I don't know if I've ever taken in anything exactly like them, and I read a lot. And I read a lot of stuff, salacious stuff, and I read a lot of stuff by friends who wrote when I was getting my degrees. And I've never read anything like this, especially coupled with those pictures of real life events, but written like in a historical fiction style and so expertly. I did want to just briefly touch on the High School Sucks series, because it's a very different kind of writing for Jeff. He weaves in, the first one's April 20th, for those of you who are trying to find it on his page, because it's the 20th anniversary of the mass shooting at Columbine High School. He talks about the phenomenon of mass shootings. He talks about how engrossed he was with Eric and Dylan, the two people in the Columbine shooting, what he thought that it meant. He weaves in wrestling stuff. And then he talks about what the real story is with the Columbine killers and how disappointing it was to him. It's, again, a viewpoint that if you don't out and out mirror and share, it's a very honest take in his mind. It's very different than the Underage Chronicles. And then the second one, which again, I said I was just going to touch on these briefly. I want you to experience and read these things for yourself, and I feel like if I read too much of them, I'm going to spoil that, and I don't want you. It's basically about him running into somebody from high school, and about revenge. The first one is about revenge, and this one touches on a little bit about, but the revenge, instead of being this physical thing that he gets, is you see this guy. Here's the great paragraph. I'll just read one. I said I wasn't going to, but I want to because I just love this one. I remember I was wearing and this is him running into a high school classmate who had it all together. He was a popular and well-liked guy, okay? So here's Jeff. I remember I was wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt, some NBA All-Star Game shorts, my ubiquitous Panthers hat, and some Spider-Man Vans. He was wearing a shit brown suit with shittier brown wingtips. After he talked about his boring job, his boring family, and his mind-numbing life, he asked how I was. I mentioned my wife and all the incredible trips and adventures we had lined up. As with her being a teacher, we have 2 months every summer, as well as spring break, fall break, Thanksgiving break, Christmas break, etc., to do anything we want. And then he incorporates the other stuff that he's written about previously. If your time in high school was glorious and you think I'm wrong, that's cool. I don't pretend to speak for anyone but myself. I hated high school. But since then, I've led an incredible life and I've seen and done things most can only dream of. Like I said, this is an American success story. Of course, I was already doing that stuff in high school. That's why none of these high school traditions appeal to me. Quote, "Hey man, you missed a hell of a kegger after the game." All bummer. That sounds so much more appealing than being in New York City on the Forty Deuce watching live sex on stage at Show World. Maybe next time. Go read this shit. I have friends that got PhDs in literature, and I had them look at these, and they said these are some of the most readable slice of life things I've ever read. Now, those friends tend towards the salacious as I do. But I would say this. One of the things that makes Jeff G. Bailey the greatest manager in Georgia wrestling in the last 30 years is because he lived this life. You can't fake this. You can't fake that adventurous spirit. You can't fake that boldness and this brashness and that life experience that he went through. And he's letting you into these worlds that you never knew existed, much less had access to. Go experience these worlds for yourself. That's what's great about reading in general, right? You get to travel. You get to experience million stories. All true. But I'm telling you, go. Jeff G. Bailey, go friend him. Jeff G., put this shit up in a place where everybody can see it, and I'll promote the fuck out of it, because greatness exists in these stories. And greatness is what we all want to be a part of. It's a thing bigger than ourselves. So go experience it, especially from one of your wrestling brethren. He should be proud. I'm proud for him being my friend. And you'll feel something too once you read these things. A connection or an understanding or just being able to see through the lens that I see it through, where you go, this is fucking good. It's not just interesting, it's fucking good. And I'm here to tell you it's not just good, it's great. This has been Be Kind Review.